Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Who gave this scoundrel a white coat? Laughed the chief doctor with his colleagues, pointing at the orphan nurse. But when they heard how the clinic owner addressed the poor girl, everyone froze. Who gave this scoundrel a white coat? Repeated the chief doctor, Tomas Sanchez, speaking to his colleagues and everyone present in the operating room, barely holding back a mocking smile. He was so sure of his influence and power that he didn't notice how harshly he was hurting someone. At that moment, his finger was pointed at a girl named Margarita, a 27-year-old orphan who had just started working as an ordinary nurse in a famous private clinic. Everyone around, doctors, assistants, orderlies, exchanged glances, and trying to please the boss, they supported him with mocking smiles or at least silent agreement. No one thought of defending her, because the chief doctor's anger was terrifying. If he was displeased, the worker had a hard time. Margarita stood there, staring at the floor, her whole soul shrinking in hurt and pain. Who gave this scoundrel a white coat? Tomas repeated. His laughter sounded in the operating room like a sharp slap. However, she didn't respond. She remained silent out of fear and the reasonable understanding that any objection would only make the situation worse. But inside, Margarita was burning. She couldn't believe that on her second day of work, or rather, on her second official shift, she was already facing such humiliation. And these were the people who were supposed to save lives, the thought crossed her mind. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she clenched her fists and, with a force of will, suppressed the urge to burst into tears. She understood perfectly why she was there and why she couldn't allow herself to leave. By right of inheritance, this clinic was bequeathed to her, an orphan without parental support but not defenseless. Of course, no one in the operating room suspected that Margarita was the granddaughter of the former owner. This secret was carefully hidden according to the conditions set by her grandfather. The essence of the rule was that she could only become the rightful owner after going through the path from the bottom, starting as a simple nurse and working her way up, understanding all the nuances of the job. It was a kind of test of persistence and genuine love for medicine. But Tomas, the domineering chief doctor, didn't know that Margarita wasn't just some random girl from the streets. He saw in her only a rookie without a good cover, an impressive resume, or connections, and he couldn't stand such people, considering them useless and a nuisance. "Get out of my sight," he grumbled after another mockery. "And don't interfere with my work again." Margarita nodded, lowering her head, and quickly left, feeling the contemptuous gazes of her colleagues follow her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. It felt as though an invisible mask had been ripped off her, exposing her bewildered soul. She patiently waited until the commotion in the operating room subsided. Then she slowly made her way to the staff room, passing by the curious looks of an orderly, two nurses, and the anesthesiologist Julio, who passed by. He gave her a subtle shrug, as if to say hang in there, and said nothing. That was her first truly humiliating episode in the clinic, a baptism by fire. But Margarita was far from thinking of giving up. She remembered her grandfather's last words, "Don't leave, even if everything is against you. You must understand life from the inside before you become its true owner." Soon Margarita overheard other staff members discussing what had happened. Some whispered, "What did she expect? She's an orphan. Did she think she could start ordering how to resuscitate a patient right away?" Others curiously asked, "How did she even get here?" Patience, Margarita told herself, only patience and hard work. She entered the staff room, where 3 nurses and an intern were on duty. Everyone fell silent when she entered. Only one woman, the head nurse Yolanda, flinched in surprise and squinted. Margarita understood that now they would probably say something unpleasant to her, but suddenly a man in his 30s, fit, dressed in an expensive suit with a briefcase under his arm, walked into the room. He looked at Margarita as though seeing her for the first time and said, "Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm the clinic's lawyer, Carlos. I'm looking for the chief doctor. Can you tell me where his office is?" Yolanda adjusted her white cap and said haughtily, "His office is on the 2nd floor, to the left of the elevator, but he just was in the operating room. He'll probably come up soon." Great, thank you. Carlos gave Margarita a quick glance and added, "The new one, right?" "Yes," she answered with a modest nod. "Nice to meet you," the lawyer said with a slight smile, and quickly left. Strange man, Margarita thought, but she didn't have time to say anything because Yolanda loudly cleared her throat. "All right, Margarita, we're about to switch shifts. You need to replace the nurse in the therapeutic department who's on sick leave. Can you handle that?" Of course, Margarita nodded, glad that at least one task was given to her without apparent sarcasm. The head nurse quickly explained what needed to be done: check patient temperatures, distribute medications to the rooms, monitor IVs. Margarita took the cheat sheets with room names, patient lists, and headed to the next shift. The therapeutic department was in another wing of the clinic, less modern and with narrower hallways. There, Margarita met a nurse in her 40s, who waved to her. "Hi. I'm Emilia. So, you'll be helping me?" "Hello," Margarita replied with relief. "Yes, I've been assigned to replace the sick employee." "Good," Emilia, with a practiced motion, tossed a pile of medical records onto the table. "Here, study today's orders. We need to visit every room, check for complaints, measure temperatures, blood pressure, depending on the orders. There are also a few injections to do, and in the evening, patients will arrive on insurance." Margarita felt that there was a lot of information, but she tried to quickly figure it out. Fortunately, she had some theory and a bit of experience with documents from her previous internship. Emilia took her through the rooms, introducing her to the patients. "This is Margarita, our new nurse." Many people nodded kindly, some looked at her with curiosity. "Good afternoon," Margarita said as she entered a room with an elderly woman who was complaining of back pain. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, it's sore everywhere," the woman sighed. "You're the new one, so young." "Yes," Margarita smiled, trying to speak gently. "I'll take care of you with Emilia." "May I measure your blood pressure?" The woman nodded, and Margarita carefully did what was necessary. Trying to reassure the elderly patient, she offered to call the doctor if needed. The woman said she would wait a little. Margarita had many similar small scenes throughout the day. While it was routine work, she was happy that people didn't look at her with contempt. Of course, she didn't advertise what had happened to her that morning in the operating room. No one asked. It was just an ordinary hospital day, where patients needed care, and the staff had no time to discuss the newcomers. By evening, Margarita was quite tired, but she still felt satisfaction. She had helped dozens of patients, calmed the nervous ones, listened to complaints and whims. And most importantly, she had done injections and IVs without any mistakes. Essentially, this was her first full shift. It's not so bad, she thought. However, just before leaving, a young intern doctor approached her, slightly flustered. "Miss Margarita." "Yes." The patient in room 215 complained about vomiting and also about stomach pain. "I can't leave right now, I'm in a consultation. Could you help her for now? Maybe give something for nausea, set up a basin, and call the surgeon if needed?" "Of course," Margarita responded. "Where can I find the medication for nausea?" "Ask Emilia or take it from the medicine cabinet according to the doctor's orders." Margarita rushed to room 215, where she found a young woman doubled over in pain from spasms. There was a cup of coffee on her nightstand, and a half-eaten bun was lying nearby. It seemed the patient had vomited just before Margarita arrived. "Easy, easy," Margarita said gently, quickly putting on disposable gloves. "I'll help you now. Let's sit down carefully like this." The woman sobbed, catching her breath. Margarita helped her and took her temperature. It was elevated. After that, Margarita took the medications from the cabinet according to the doctor's prescription. The woman had been admitted with a suspected stomach ulcer, so nausea medication had already been prescribed in case of a flare-up. "Please take this," Margarita said, handing her a tablet. "And if you feel worse, call me immediately." The patient obeyed. Margarita sat down on a chair nearby, speaking softly, asking when the pain started and what she had eaten. About 15 minutes passed before the woman's condition slightly stabilized. The doctor arrived, examined her, confirmed the preliminary diagnosis, and prescribed an additional painkiller injection. Margarita administered the injection under his supervision. "Thank you," the patient whispered, now breathing easier. "You're so kind. I was afraid everyone here would be cold, like machines." "Don't worry," Margarita smiled. "We're doing everything we can to make you feel better." Those words, though spoken routinely, meant so much more to Margarita. This was the true calling of medicine, to help people, to comfort, to relieve pain. This was exactly what her grandfather had told her when he encouraged her to inherit the clinic. He always repeated, "You're not the owner yet. You're first a person who understands the pain of patients." The next day, Margarita was supposed to start her shift in another department, surgery. It would have been easier to settle in one place, but the head nurse had ordered that since Margarita was a reserve nurse, she should learn everything. Margarita didn't argue. She wanted to understand the clinic from all angles, especially since one of her grandfather's conditions was learn all departments to understand their specifics and needs. However, in the morning, she was called to the head doctor's office. Knowing that he could be extremely rude, Margarita mentally prepared herself. Upon entering, she saw that the temporary owner of the clinic, Salvador Oliveras, a man in his 50s with a neat beard and calm gaze, was already there. It was him who had been appointed as the observer by the will, while Margarita proved herself. Of course, no one outside the clinic knew that he was aware of the secret. Tomas, the head doctor, was sitting at a large table and, in a restrained but cold tone, said, "So here's the newbie. Have a seat." Margarita sat down, trying to keep her posture. Salvador gave her a slight nod, as if confirming everything was fine and that he was there. "So, here's the deal," Tomas started, looking at Margarita and then at the papers in front of him. "Yesterday, as I was informed, we had an emergency in the therapeutic department. A patient became ill. You, Margarita, acted quickly and called the doctor. Well, that's your job, to care for the patients. But there are questions." He paused, gazing piercingly at her. "Why did you dare to intervene in the work on your first day in the operating room? Who asked you to suggest what to do with the resuscitation monitor?" Margarita swallowed a lump in her throat. The question again. "I saw that the monitor was malfunctioning," she said quietly but clearly. "I just wanted to draw attention to the malfunction." "Do you consider yourself an expert in equipment?" Tomas asked sarcastically. "We have engineers, technicians, and operating room nurses with years of experience. Your job is to listen to your superiors and follow orders." "I understand," Margarita nodded, lowering her gaze. Inside, she was seething with resentment, but she knew it was pointless to argue. He wouldn't accept her reasoning. "I hope you understand," he growled, "and that you won't show any more initiative. That's it, you may leave." Salvador didn't say anything during those few minutes, but when Margarita stood up and headed for the door, he quietly added, "I'll see you later in the hallway. We need to talk." Margarita nodded and left. In the hallway, after waiting for the head doctor to return to his computer, Salvador caught up with her. "Don't be upset. That's how he is, but stay strong and keep working. I need you to see all the details." "I understand," Margarita whispered in response. "Don't worry, I'll manage." "Good," he said with a slight smile. "Well, keep in touch." With that, he went about his business, and Margarita hurried to the surgical department, where a new day of shifts awaited her. There, she was met with a flurry of activity. Several patients were being prepared for surgery. Orderlies rushed around, nurses gathered medical histories, and some were searching for surgical instruments. Margarita asked, "Who's in charge here?" They pointed her to a woman in her mid-30s with a firm gaze, Vicenta, the head nurse of the surgical department. Seeing Margarita, she shook her head. "A newbie? I hope you're not stupid. There's a lot of work. You need to think fast. Got it, Margarita nodded. Ready to help. What do I need to do? First, I'll show you the post where the orders are recorded. Then you'll need to go to the procedure room and prepare the 4 drips. After that, we'll visit the patients who are scheduled for surgery tomorrow, and then we'll see if there's help needed in the bandaging room. Margarita felt in her element, hustle, tension in the air. But she had long wanted to work in medicine, and surgery had always attracted her as one of the most important fields. Of course, understanding all the intricacies came with experience, so she didn't push ahead or disobey Vicenta. During the day, a significant situation occurred. An elderly woman with heart disease suddenly started complaining of shortness of breath and chest pain, and the treating doctor had stepped out for a consultation. Vicenta urgently searched for the attending doctor, while Margarita tried to calm the patient, placing her in a comfortable position and giving her an oxygen mask. This was part of the recommendations for heart-related shortness of breath. When the surgeon arrived, it turned out that the woman also had a spike in blood pressure. How timely, the surgeon praised Vicenta. Well done for not leaving it unattended. This is Margarita who noticed it, Vicenta unexpectedly said, pointing at the girl. The newbie. The surgeon, a middle-aged man in glasses, nodded at Margarita. Good thing you didn't panic, but remember, any procedures should be strictly according to the doctor's orders or prescribed guidelines. Of course, Margarita agreed. She was pleased that Vicenta stood up for her and didn't take credit for someone else's work. It meant that there were still kind people among the staff who could appreciate the work of a newcomer. Meanwhile, Tomas rarely showed up in the surgical wing. He specialized in neurosurgeries and oversaw the general management, so Margarita felt somewhat at ease. In the evening, as the day was coming to a close, Margarita entered the nurse's break room. Another girl, Maria, whom she had already met at the registration desk, was sitting there, looking tired. Oh, Margarita, there's no peace in surgery. One patient is out of surgery, another is about to go. How are you holding up? Fine, Margarita smirked, sitting down on a chair. I'm trying not to pay attention to some jabs. And there will be more, Maria nodded. But you know, I've been working here for 2 years, and at first, it bothered me too. So, it's probably normal. The main thing is, don't let it get to you. Margarita thanked her for the kind words and started drinking coffee from a plastic cup. She knew that she would have to work hard and diligently before earning any respect here. Suddenly, Emilia popped her head in through the door, the one from the therapeutic department. She saw Margarita and waved. Oh, you're here. Great, we need your help in the ER. A patient with a complicated fracture has arrived. We need to fill out the paperwork quickly and accompany them to the X-ray. The surgeons are busy. The nurses were asked to help. Margarita had just taken a sip of tea, but without hesitation, she stood up. Let's go. They ran down the hall and soon arrived at the emergency room. There was indeed a man in his 40s, pale and grimacing in pain. His wife was holding his hand. There was no doctor in sight. He hadn't arrived yet. Emilia started on the paperwork, while Margarita found a stretcher to move the patient to the X-ray room. The man was groaning. It hurts, my leg. I fell off the stairs. Relax, we'll get an X-ray now, Margarita spoke as softly as she could to calm him down. After that, the doctor will decide what to do. A nurse quickly appeared, helping to lift the patient and transfer him to the stretcher. His wife, trembling, walked beside him. Margarita noticed tears running down her face and softly said, Don't worry. We'll take care of him. Everything will be fine. The woman gave a weak nod but seemed to be looking at Margarita with gratitude, as if thankful that she hadn't left them alone in this maze of corridors and rooms. When they reached the X-ray room, the attending trauma doctor arrived. He began to examine the man and asked Margarita to step out for a moment while he performed the procedure. The wife stayed outside. The door. Margarita stood with her. He's very scared, the woman whispered. I'm afraid he might need surgery. If he does, they'll do it under anesthesia, Margarita tried to reassure her. We have good surgeons. Don't worry. Soon the patient was wheeled out of the X-ray room. The doctor said that, indeed, the fracture is complex. Likely, it will need to be set under anesthesia. Margarita escorted the man to his room, helped his wife take care of the formalities, and only when everything had quieted down did she look at the time again. The workday had long since ended. Listen, you can go home now, said Amelia, glancing at Margarita. You're not required to stay until all the doctors leave. Yeah, thanks, Margarita replied. I just wanted to help. That's commendable, Amelia sighed, but tomorrow there will be a lot of work again. Rest up. Margarita said goodbye to her and made her way to the locker room. She also decided to stop by the registration desk to check if any new tasks had been assigned to her for the morning. There she saw only Galia, the duty registrar, who was already preparing to close the window for patients. Margarita, come in, Galia waved her hand tiredly. What brings you here? Just checking if we have everything for today, the girl replied. Yes, no new patients are expected. You can safely head home. Margarita nodded and, after saying goodbye, walked down the hallway to the exit. The evening lighting in the clinic was dimmer than during the day, and a few staff members moved back and forth. When she stepped outside, the cool air hit her. Finally, she could catch her breath. On her way home, she thought about how, day by day, she was getting to know the clinic more deeply. Today's cases in surgery and the emergency department had shown her how crucial fast response is and how much extra help is needed. What if there weren't enough staff? She thought. How much time would the patient with the fracture have lost? Her grandfather's words came to mind. Remember, not everything can be solved with money. The most important thing is people and their ability to work together. But money would be important too. Without it, you couldn't pay the medical staff or buy equipment. Margarita smiled bitterly, recalling how the meeting had focused entirely on profits. It seemed that some of the managers had forgotten what this clinic was really for. A few days later, Margarita once again faced Tomas's rudeness. This time, he lashed out at her for allegedly filling out a VIP patient's card incorrectly in the registration department, although in reality, she had only been there for 15 minutes. And the other registrars had been filling out the card. The chief doctor found a reason to reprimand her. How do you not understand? He yelled, standing in the reception hall. We have special clients. Their names and information should not be in the general database without approval. You can't just mindlessly copy everything. I didn't enter them myself, Margarita tried to argue, but her voice was weak, and people around her listened with curiosity. More excuses? Tomas sneered. Do you even realize how much our clinic loses if the client is unhappy? It was a clear injustice. Margarita felt a lump rise in her throat. She tried to glance at Galia, the registrar. She looked away. No one wanted to get caught in the boss's crossfire. Sorry, Margarita finally spoke, hiding her resentment. I'll double-check the details with my colleagues. That's what I thought, the chief doctor growled, then walked off, throwing angry glances around. Tears were about to spill from her eyes, but Margarita gritted her teeth. I hope something changes soon, she thought, but for now, I have to endure. However, not all colleagues were hostile. Some, seeing how she was treated, started to feel sympathetic toward Margarita. Especially Vicenta from surgery, who had told her a couple of times. Just ignore him. We know you're a good nurse. Or Julio, the anesthesiologist, who often threw her an encouraging word. Hang in there. A week later, an important event took place. Salvador called a meeting with several key employees and secretly invited Margarita to attend as an assistant. Again, he wanted her to understand how decisions were made. Margarita entered the conference room along with a young secretary holding a folder of documents. In the room were Tomas, the head of the department, lawyer Carlos, and a couple of influential figures, likely potential investors. Margarita quietly took a seat in the corner, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. The discussion was about plans to expand the VIP wards, raise prices, and purchase new equipment. Tomas confidently, and at times aggressively, pushed his agenda. He wanted to acquire additional robotic surgery systems, arguing that it would increase the clinic's prestige. The investors were interested but asked how long it would take to recoup the investment. "But we already have modern equipment, don't we?" asked one of them, glancing at his notes. "I don't see the urgent need to spend more millions." "Enough is a relative term," Tomas countered. "To compete with the best clinics in the capital, we need to stay ahead of the curve." "What about the staff?" suddenly asked the second investor. "We can buy 10 robotic systems, but if we don't have specialists who can operate them, what's the point?" "We'll hire specialists," Tomas waved it off. "Or we'll train some of our surgeons." Margarita couldn't help but think of how many times she had seen staff running from department to department, how there weren't enough on-call doctors. Indeed, staffing is tight, she thought, but kept quiet. Her voice wouldn't be heard now anyway. Meanwhile, the topic of employee salaries was raised. The chief accountant, a timid woman in large glasses, began reporting that inflation was rising and staff was asking for salary increases, otherwise some threatened to quit. Carlos, the lawyer, dryly noted that those who left could break important contracts. After all, VIP doctors usually sign special agreements. "What do you suggest?" Salvador asked, steepling his fingers. "Perhaps we could do selective raises?" suggested the accountant. "For critically important specialists." "So, surgeons, anesthesiologists," Carlos extended the thought, "and the rest?" "The rest would get a minimal raise, if there are funds left in the budget," the accountant sighed. "We need top-class doctors," Tomas quickly interjected. "Nurses and orderlies, well, of course, they're important, but they can be found anywhere if they quit." Margarita's insides tightened at these words. "So that's how they see us," she thought, lowering her head slightly. How difficult it was to keep herself together when hearing such contempt for those who, in fact, provide constant and direct patient care. The meeting went on for some time, and in the end, Salvador summed up. "All right, we'll think more about the equipment and calculate the profitability. We'll decide on the salaries in the next month. But in any case, we'll have to allocate funds for key doctors to avoid losing them. That's all for now, thank you everyone." People rustled papers and stood up. Margarita also rose, trying to slip out unnoticed, but suddenly Tomas threw a glance her way. "Hey, young lady, who are you?" She was a little startled, not expecting such a direct question, but the secretary standing next to her quickly answered. "She's my assistant. Just helping with the paperwork." The chief doctor frowned disapprovingly but didn't press further and waved his hand. Margarita exhaled in relief and followed the others out. In the hallway, Salvador caught up with her. "So, what's your impression?" "Honestly?" Margarita looked at him. "It's sad, they talk about nurses' salaries as if we're disposable." "I understand," he nodded. "But part of what Tomas says is true. Good doctors bring revenue to the clinic. VIP clients come for them, and nurses, well, they're easier to find. That's how the market works. But without nurses, without those who give injections, set IVs, and support patients, everything will fall apart. People will be shocked by such an attitude." "I agree," Salvador said calmly, "but until you have full ownership rights, you won't be able to change this. And even then, you'll have to fight the system. So, gain experience." Margarita nodded, clenching her lips. She wanted to shout that they weren't disposable, but she understood that without authority, it was pointless. And so, a couple more months passed working at the clinic. Margarita managed to work in many departments: pediatrics, where the children liked her for her kind voice, in the ICU, where everything was much tougher, and in the lab, where she helped with paperwork for tests. Everywhere she saw how important the people were, every nurse, every technician. And everywhere, the chief doctor pushed his agenda. Doctors were the most important, especially the renowned ones. The rest were secondary. However, Margarita began to make more acquaintances and even friends among the staff. She wasn't arrogant and always tried to help, so some colleagues warmed up to her. For instance, Vicenta from surgery always praised her for her attention to detail, Emilia from therapy appreciated her responsiveness, and Maria from registration liked her calm demeanor with patients. Even the lawyer, Carlos, whom she occasionally crossed paths with, looked at her with curiosity and said, "Are you staying here for long?" "Yes. I notice you're persistent." The head nurse, Yolanda, still kept her distance and sometimes shot her a sideways glance, but she seemed to recognize that Margarita wasn't so easy to break. As for the chief doctor, he continued to call her into his office under any pretext: paperwork too slow, patient not positioned correctly, why did you give N4 without a doctor's order? Margarita had to stay strong. During one of these reprimands, there was a noticeable clash. Tomas began yelling in the hallway in front of staff and patients, claiming that Margarita had violated discipline by moving an elderly patient to the examination room without official permission. Margarita tried to explain that the patient had felt unwell and couldn't wait, but the chief doctor wasn't listening. "We do everything by the rules here," he snarled. "Understand? And if you ever move patients from department to department without an order again, I'll fire you." He turned and left, throwing disapproving glances as he went. The people in the hallway, orderlies, nurses, patients, stood there in silence. The elderly patient looked pitifully at Margarita. "Sorry, sweetheart, they yelled at you because of me." "Don't worry. It's fine," Margarita smiled through her tears. "The important thing is that you feel better." Looking at this scene, several staff members quietly shook their heads. Some sympathized with Margarita, while others didn't want to get involved. That was the state of affairs. But one day, everything changed in just a few minutes. It happened when a very important person visited the clinic, the VIP who had special conditions. His last name was Cortez. He was the CEO of a large corporation. He came for a routine health checkup, but apparently, complications were found, and an urgent consultation with the chief doctor was needed. Tomas rushed to the reception room as soon as he heard who had arrived. But it just so happened that Margarita was the one helping to register the patient, unaware of his special status. They treated him like a regular patient, politely and calmly. Despite being a wealthy man, Rodrigo was polite and without any arrogance. He thanked Margarita for her tact and attentiveness, even joking that he didn't expect such a human approach. When the chief doctor arrived, he saw Margarita measuring Cortez's blood pressure while the latter was smiling kindly at her. This came as a surprise to Tomas, as he thought Margarita could only be an obstacle, yet here was a VIP patient thanking her. "Tomas," Rodrigo said, seeing the chief doctor, "this wonderful employee of yours helped me so kindly. She should be rewarded. You know, very considerate young lady." Margarita froze, and the chief doctor smiled awkwardly, trying not to show his dislike. "Yes, of course. All our nurses are highly qualified." "I noticed that," the patient responded. "Well, I hope it's not so bad with my health." After this episode, the chief doctor couldn't scold Margarita in front of the VIP, but when Rodrigo went for his examination, Tomas found her in the corridor and hissed quietly, "Don't think that just because an important client praised you, you're the boss around here, understand?" "Understood," Margarita replied, nodding calmly. "Keep working," he grumbled, and with quick steps, disappeared. However, the pleasant aftertaste of the patient's praise brought a little joy to Margarita's heart. After all, her efforts were noticed, and in the end, someone influential might value human interaction, not just status. Several weeks passed. Margarita continued working, occasionally meeting with Salvador. He secretly inquired about her progress, asking about problems within the team. She spoke about how difficult it sometimes was, how often people were behind, how there were shortages of supplies. Salvador listened, nodded, but admitted that without Margarita actually owning the clinic, it would be hard to make significant changes. One evening, he called Margarita. "Hello, tomorrow the auditors from the insurance company will arrive. They need to see that everything here is top-notch. There will be a meeting, and then they'll inspect the department. Be prepared, they might even ask the nurses questions. Got it, Margarita replied. I'll be ready. And one more thing, Salvador paused. Try not to provoke Tomas. He's very tense right now. If you cause a conflict in front of the auditors, it will be a scandal, and that could harm the clinic's reputation. Margarita understood what it meant to try. Easier said than done, but she promised to be cautious. The next day, indeed, the auditors arrived, 2 men and a woman, strict, dressed in suits with folders. They were greeted in the clinic's lobby like important guests. Tomas smiled sweetly, talking about the clinic's successes and new technologies. They walked through the floors, visiting the VIP rooms. Margarita occasionally appeared in the line of sight, but tried to stay in the background. However, at one point, when the auditors were inspecting the pediatric department, an incident occurred. One of the small patients developed a fever. A vomiting episode started, and the staff rushed to help. Margarita, who was nearby, quickly called the pediatrician, brought a basin, and started comforting the frightened mother. All of this happened in front of the auditors, who were curiously observing how the situation was handled. Soon, the chief doctor arrived, noticing the commotion. What's going on here? He asked sternly, looking at the nurses. The boy had an episode, Margarita explained. We gave him an antiemetic as prescribed, called the doctor. He's feeling better now. The chief doctor, seeing the auditors trying to evaluate the staff's reaction, had to nod. Good that you reacted quickly. Still, you should have called the pediatrician faster. I called him right away, Margarita said. Excellent, the chief doctor replied shortly, turning to the auditors. As you can see, we have a well-established response system. Yes, we noticed, the auditors replied, making notes. One of them approached Margarita and asked, Tell me, how long have you worked here? Several months already, Margarita answered calmly. And how are the conditions? Are there enough resources to provide help to the children? Tomas tensed, preparing to interrupt, but Margarita, catching his gaze, answered as neutrally as possible. We have everything we need in the department. If any issues arise, we resolve them with the management. I see, the auditor nodded. Thank you. He noticed that Margarita was speaking neither with excitement nor complaints and made some note in his notebook. The rest of the day, the auditors continued their inspection, and by the evening, they left. They said the results would come later. Tomas, seemingly relieved, but on his way to his office, saw Margarita and gave her a crooked smile. You can stop bothering the auditors with your thoughts. They won't figure out anything special. I was just answering their questions, Margarita said quietly. Even more reason not to, then. Go back to work. So, no changes were expected, but inside Margarita, a sense of confidence slowly accumulated, and she realized that she was no longer as helpless as on her first day. She had skills, understood the process, and knew the people. And most importantly, she felt that many colleagues respected her for her hard work. A week later, a loud piece of news broke. New investors were coming to the clinic, including a certain Mr. Felipe Blasquez, who had once worked in a state hospital before moving into business. He was planning to invest a large sum into the development of the surgical wing, but he wanted to see everything with his own eyes. Tomas was preparing to meet Felipe as if he were a high-ranking person. The entire staff was warned to be on their toes, maintain order, and make a good impression. On the day the investors arrived, Margarita was involved in the surgical department. As luck would have it, there was a collapse that morning. They brought in 2 critical patients from a car accident, and emergency surgeries began. Some surgeons were occupied, and there weren't enough anesthesiologists. 4 drips needed to be set quickly, and there weren't enough nurses. It was complete chaos. On top of that, it turned out that one of the rooms was missing basic gloves in the required size, probably a supply error. Margarita rushed to the storage room to find some backups, and on her way, she ran into Julio, the anesthesiologist. Margarita, I'm stressed. One patient is allergic. I need special meds, but I can't find the catalog. Do you know where to look? Let's look together, Margarita offered, but then she heard Vicenta calling. Margarita, help bring some extra blood transfusion systems. Margarita was torn, but pushing through, she ran to the supply zone, found a box of systems, brought a pack of gloves, and then Julio also started searching through cabinets. Soon, they both returned to the operating room, exaggerating their breathing from the fast pace. Thanks, Julio said. I'll take it from here. Good luck, Margarita nodded. She understood that in a situation like this, the investor's status took a back seat. The most important thing was saving lives. And then, as if mocking fate, Tomas and Mr. Felipe appeared in the corridor, followed by other investors. The chief doctor was showing them the equipment. See, we have everything here with the latest technology. Excuse me, Felipe interrupted, what's all this commotion? Indeed, orderlies were running down the corridor, and shouts could be heard, urgent, blood to the lab. Get the stretcher. Tomas frowned disapprovingly. Just an emergency case. A car accident. Our staff is handling it. Everything's under control. Felipe, being a former doctor, could see that everything wasn't going smoothly. And suddenly, his gaze fell on Margarita, who was rushing by with a stack of blood transfusion systems. He called out to her. Miss, could I speak with you for a minute? Margarita didn't immediately understand that he was calling her, but upon seeing his insistent gesture, she approached. Yes, she said, trying to speak calmly. What's going on? I see there's an operation happening, right? Yes, we have heavy patients from a car accident, Margarita replied. We're doing everything to provide the surgeons with what they need. Is there enough equipment, supplies, and staff? Felipe asked with a mixed expression. It seemed like a simple question, but Margarita got the sense that he was checking whether they were embellishing the situation. The chief doctor gave Margarita a warning glance, signaling her to be careful with her words. Margarita bit her lip. We. Redoing everything we can, she hesitated, deciding whether to tell the truth. Don't worry, Felipe said smoothly. We're investing money here to improve the conditions. I want to hear from the staff about the real problems. Well, Margarita sighed. Sometimes we run out of supplies. Sometimes I have to rush around the storage rooms to find what's needed. But other than that, we try to work quickly to save patients. Tomas grimaced but stayed silent. Felipe nodded. I see, thank you. I need to go, Margarita added, nodding at the box in her hands. Sorry, of course, go ahead, Felipe said, letting her go. Margarita hurried to the operating room, feeling her heart pounding. She instinctively knew she hadn't said exactly what the chief doctor wanted to hear, but she couldn't lie. Meanwhile, the investors continued the tour with Tomas. Felipe asked the staff direct questions, despite the chief doctor's attempts to shift the conversation to prestige, VIP, everything is great. And somehow, it became clear that the clinic really needed investments not only in robotic systems but also in everyday consumables, and possibly in staffing. In the end, when everything settled down, Margarita emerged from the operating room and heard Felipe loudly speaking to the chief doctor by the elevator. I see you have a good clinic. But you should take care of the basic supply and coordination quality before going for high-tech equipment. The chief doctor mumbled something in response. The investors said their goodbyes. The next day, rumors spread in the clinic that Felipe wasn't rushing to invest in trendy robotic systems. Instead, he suggested reforming the supply system and purchasing additional equipment for emergencies. This went against Tomas's plans, who was eager to get a cool setup for complex neurosurgical operations. Naturally, this annoyed the chief doctor, and he was looking for someone to vent his frustration on. In the end, Margarita once again became his target. The chief doctor called her to his office and slammed the door behind her. Did you complain to Felipe that the clinic is running out of materials? He hissed. I just answered his question, Margarita said quietly, trying to stay composed. I couldn't lie. You could have kept quiet. The chief doctor raised his voice. People like you are the reason we lose the chance to get advanced equipment. Sorry, but we really do suffer from a shortage of consumables. Yesterday, I was running around looking for systems and gloves, Margarita timidly reminded him. That's not your concern, he snapped. Your job is to do as you're told. Margarita could no longer hold back. But don't you understand? Because we don't have gloves of the right size, our surgeons waste time. The patient might suffer from the delay in the surgery. The chief doctor flared up. How dare you argue with me, a doctor with 20 years of experience? I don't dare, Margarita said, flinching from his loud shout. I'm just telling the truth. That's it, you're fired. He exhaled this like throwing a stone. Submit your resignation immediately. We'll process everything properly. I won't tolerate such chatter here. Margarita felt the ground slipping from under her feet. There it was, the unexpected decision. Firing was the easiest thing. She looked him in the eyes. Okay, she whispered, I'll write the resignation, but... No buts, he cut her off. Out of my office. She rushed out and, trembling, leaned against the wall in the hallway, trying to control the panic rising in her chest. He'll fire me, she thought, but I can't leave without finishing what I started. The first person she decided to call was Salvador. He answered immediately. Margarita, what happened? Your voice is trembling. They want to fire me. The chief doctor told me to submit my resignation. Calm down. I'll be there soon, Salvador said. Don't you dare write any resignation letter. Half an hour later, he was already at the clinic and went into the chief doctor's office. Margarita waited in the hallway, not hearing what they were saying but guessing that the conversation was tough. About 20 minutes later, the door flung open and a furious Tomas stormed out. He didn't even look at Margarita and stomped past her. Salvador followed him out and said, It's all sorted out. You don't have to write any resignation letter. He's obviously furious, but I mentioned the owner's directive. So, for now, I'll take care of everything regarding our need for additional staff. Thank you, Margarita whispered, feeling her heart racing. But keep in mind, now he'll hate you even more. He thinks you're under the owner's protection, Salvador sighed. Be careful. I understand, but I'm not leaving, Margarita replied firmly. I'm not afraid of him. They said a quick goodbye. Margarita didn't see the point in looking the chief doctor in the eye. He had already made his feelings clear, but now she knew that he couldn't just fire her. At least, not while Salvador was protecting her. Days went by, and the tension grew. Tomas openly ignored Margarita, acting like she didn't exist. And when he had to speak to her, it was only in a raised tone. In the departments where she was assigned, everything was relatively fine, but as soon as the chief doctor appeared nearby, the atmosphere grew tense. This continued for about a month. During that time, Margarita became almost indispensable in some departments. There was a shortage of experienced nurses, and she was already flexible, able to quickly adapt and assist. Her colleagues generally appreciated her, though there were some envious ones claiming she was the chief doctor's pet. Margarita just bitterly smiled. Yes, the pet. The chief doctor just yelled at me. But rumors in the workplace are stubborn, and she didn't know how to dispel them while keeping her secret. Eventually, the moment came when the truth had to come out. It happened by chance. A distant relative of the chief doctor suddenly showed up at the clinic. He had learned from some semi-hidden sources that the real heir, the orphan, whom the grandfather had named in his will, was working at the clinic as a nurse, hiding her identity. This relative of the chief doctor, apparently hoping for some benefit if he uncovered this sensation, approached Tomas. At that moment, other employees, including Margarita, were standing in the hallway, and he spoke loudly. Do you know, Tomas, that the actual heir of the owner is working at the clinic? The orphan, to whom everything was left. Can you imagine? The chief doctor froze, staring at him. What nonsense! What heir? The relative realized that the chief doctor didn't know anything and raised his voice even more. Yes, there's information that the granddaughter of the former owner, an orphan, is working here as a nurse, just hiding. The staff around them fell silent, frozen. Margarita felt her heart nearly leap out of her chest. This is it, she thought. Tomas scanned the gathered staff, among them was Margarita, and then laughed. An orphan, an heir? How is that possible? What's this mysterious person's name? The relative shrugged. I don't know. I couldn't figure out the name. I think it's Margarita, or something like that. At that point, many of them gasped, as only one nurse named Margarita had recently started, the orphan. Everyone turned to the young woman. A tense silence hung in the air. Margarita, one of the orderlies, spoke. Could it really be you? Margarita blushed but realized that there was no point in hiding anymore. She hadn't expected anyone, other than Salvador, to know. Especially not like this. She took a step forward. Yes, it's me, she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm the granddaughter and the heir. My grandfather left me this clinic, but with the condition that I have to start from the bottom to understand how everything works here. Grave silence. Tomas looked as if he had been struck with a club. He opened and closed his mouth several times, trying to figure out how to react. Colleagues stood in shock, nurses, orderlies, doctors, all stunned. How? How is this possible? He finally managed to say. She's just an orphan. A new nurse. She's not just an orphan, Salvador, who had appeared nearby, interrupted. She's the rightful heir, and I, as the interim manager, confirmed this officially. But we've kept this information hidden until now, so Margarita could, according to the late owner's will, go through all the stages of work. The staff whispered and exchanged glances. Some threw their hands up in disbelief, others exhaled in confusion. No way. This is, Tomas muttered, realizing he had treated her as a nobody, humiliated her, and almost fired her. But why didn't anyone tell me? Because Margarita's grandfather wished it to be this way, Salvador responded calmly. He wanted her not to take advantage of any privileges, to understand all aspects of the clinic's work. And I assure you, Tomas, she has proven herself worthy. Tomas shifted from foot to foot, realizing that all his past rude behavior had been directed at the future owner. He tried to find a way out. But this may not be final. We need documents. Salvador took out a folder. All the documents are in order. The will has come into effect. It just operated through guardianship until Margarita was ready to take her place. And that moment has come. The staff murmured even louder. Some were outraged. How could she hide this from them? Others smiled. Now it all makes sense, where her resilience comes from. And some were angry, believing Margarita had deceived them. Quiet, Margarita raised her hand, addressing her colleagues. I apologize for not saying this earlier, but I had to fulfill my grandfather's will and understand what the employees at all levels feel, not just walk into the office and say, I'm the owner. A silence fell over the room. Margarita turned to the chief doctor, who was now visibly flushed. Tomas, she said in a calm voice, I fully understand that you didn't know who I was, but your methods of communication with the staff are unacceptable. I saw it not only toward me but also toward my colleagues whom you humiliated and intimidated. Tomas tried to argue, but couldn't find the words. The facts were clear. From today, Salvador added, Margarita assumes full ownership. She will have the right to make managerial decisions. Tomas, as chief doctor, is required to follow the owner's orders within the law. Upon hearing this, Tomas suddenly grew cold. To him, it sounded like a verdict. Now, all the levers of power were in the hands of the girl he had humiliated for so long. He tried to speak. Well, maybe we can come to an agreement? Agree on what? Margarita quietly asked, looking him directly in the eyes. On me turning a blind eye to how you treat people, to your methods? I'm sorry, Tomas, but I won't support your policy of fear. I intend to bring order to the clinic so that doctors, nurses, and other staff work with respect toward one another." The staff around her quietly whispered to each other. Many looked at her with relief, as they had long wanted change. "If you can change your leadership style and treat me as the rightful owner," Margarita continued, "we can continue our collaboration. If not, I'll be forced to look for another chief doctor." "How?" Tomas began. But he realized that there were few alternatives left. Resign, lose his status, position, and influence? Where would he find such a high salary and opportunities? And his reputation was tightly connected with this clinic. "I'm ready to work under your leadership," he ground out through clenched teeth. "But please consider my experience and merits." "I will," Margarita nodded. "But only if you change your attitude toward people." The conversation ended as the staff began to disperse. Some rushed to return to their work, others hurried to discuss the news around the corner. Margarita asked Salvador to step aside with her. "I didn't expect the truth to come out so suddenly." "Neither did I," he smiled sadly. "But maybe it's for the best. Now all the cards are on the table. What should I do next?" Margarita looked a little lost. "I don't want to fire everyone, but order is needed. First, you need to officially assume the role of owner. This doesn't mean you'll perform the functions of a director. Typically, they hire a manager for that. But you will be the one with the final say. You need to understand that this is a huge responsibility." "I understand, but I don't want to leave medicine," Margarita admitted. "I like helping people directly." "No one is forbidding you to continue practicing," Salvador said. "But maybe you should take on the position of head nurse or head of a department to have a better influence on processes. According to the law, you can combine these roles, as long as the shareholders are okay with it. Since most of the shares will be yours after the inheritance," he shrugged, "the decision is essentially up to you." Margarita sighed. She had only dreamed of something like this. To be a medical worker and have the opportunity to reform the clinic. Now it was becoming a reality. But at the same time, it all seemed so complicated. The next day, Salvador and the lawyer Carlos prepared all the documents to present Margarita as the legal owner. She had to address the staff and explain the policies she wanted to implement. Of course, many employees were eagerly awaiting this moment. In the morning, Margarita woke up nervous. Will I really be managing people who just yesterday looked down on me? But then she remembered the months she had worked there as an ordinary nurse and thought of her grandfather, which gave her strength. By noon, the staff gathered in the assembly hall: doctors, nurses, orderlies, and lab technicians. Carlos placed a microphone on the table, and Salvador stood beside him. Tomas sat in the front row, trying to maintain an impassive face. As Margarita approached the podium, she felt a lump in her throat but pulled herself together and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margarita. Until recently, you knew me as an ordinary nurse. Now it's time to tell the truth. I am the granddaughter and heiress of the previous owner of the clinic. I apologize for keeping this a secret, but it was my grandfather's wish for me to go through all the stages of work here. I won't dwell on how difficult it was. I'm sure many saw that I wasn't treated kindly, but I've completed that journey and now I want to use the experience I've gained to improve the lives of all the staff. And most importantly, to provide better care for our patients." The staff listened attentively. Some shook their heads, others nodded. "I want to say that I value each and every one of you," Margarita continued. "Without nurses, orderlies, doctors, lab technicians, and administrative staff, the clinic couldn't function. Therefore, I plan to introduce several reforms in the near future to create more comfortable working conditions." A murmur of approval ran through the hall. Many, especially the junior and middle staff, had been waiting for something like this for a long time. "We will review the procurement system so that we no longer face constant shortages of supplies. We'll also analyze schedules to avoid overloading people. Of course, I will revise the way management interacts with the staff. It is unacceptable to treat subordinates with humiliation. The hall buzzed louder, with applause and shouts of finally and thank you. Tomas sat grimly, feeling his position wobble. Margarita raised her hand, asking for silence. I'm not going to dismantle what's already working well, she continued. I know that the clinic has qualified specialists, including our chief physician, but I insist that the system of relationships and staffing policies need to change. A voice from the back row asked, Margarita, is it true that you will personally be involved in the management? Yes, she nodded. I will have help from the interim manager, Salvador, and the board of directors. But I will have the final say, as the majority of shares now belong to me. Applause erupted again. Margarita noticed some people smiling at her happily, while others looked at her cautiously. Some might have been afraid of change, while others still didn't fully trust her, since she had been one of them and had suddenly become the owner. Tomas quickly raised his hand, asking for the floor. I'd like to add that I am willing to support any reasonable changes, he gritted through his teeth. I've served the clinic for many years and wanted to prosper. He tried to sound confident, but his gaze was still tense, and Margarita could feel that this collaboration wouldn't be easy. Nonetheless, she nodded. It's good to hear, Tomas. I hope we can work together to take the clinic to a new level. The hall went quiet, then someone clapped again. The words new level sounded like a chance for improvement in working conditions to many. Closing the meeting, Margarita thanked everyone for their attention and walked out into the corridor with a great sense of relief, but also with the realization of her new responsibilities. Well, congratulations on your initiation, Salvador smiled. Now you're the owner. Thank you, Margarita replied, clutching the folder with documents to her chest. But there's a lot of work ahead. Yes, he nodded, but we'll manage. Thus began a new era in the clinic's history. Margarita officially became the owner, and everyone knew about it. Now no one could humiliate her by referring to her as a newcomer with no experience. Of course, some were unhappy, especially the old guard, accustomed to Tomas's authoritarian style, but the junior and mid-level staff breathed a sigh of relief. One of Margarita's first steps was to propose discussing the pain points with representatives from each department to understand what reforms were needed. She was assisted by Salvador, Carlos the lawyer, and the chief accountant. A series of meetings was arranged in the conference hall, where doctors, nurses, and orderlies were invited. During each meeting, Margarita took the floor. Please, don't hesitate. If anything is wrong in your department, we need to know so we can address the problem. At first, people spoke hesitantly, but gradually they straightened up. It turned out that some departments were understaffed, the schedules were extremely inconvenient, and some places required overtime without additional pay. Margarita carefully noted all this. Another issue was procurement. It turned out that some suppliers, longtime partners of Tomas, were supplying medical supplies at inflated prices, and the quality was average at best. Margarita ordered an audit of the contracts. Lawyer Carlos helped investigate. Indeed, there were bonuses for the chief physician. When these details came to light, Margarita knew there would be a serious conversation with Tomas. She suspected he would go on the defensive, but she wasn't backing down. After all, this was her grandfather's business, and the dishonest supply scheme was undermining the clinic. She invited the chief physician to meet in her office. The former owner's office was now her workspace, although Margarita mostly walked around the departments. Tomas entered, trying to maintain a polite demeanor. So, what do you want to discuss, Margarita? Have a seat, she said, and he sat down across from her, looking at her with a pretended calmness. Margarita opened the folder with the documents. We checked the suppliers of medical supplies and found that their prices are often 20 to 30% above market prices, while the quality is sometimes lower than that of competitors. Can you explain that? The chief physician turned red. Well, we've had long-term relationships with these suppliers. They are reliable, always deliver on time, while cheaper ones can have delays. We've contacted other companies and found that delays are not inevitable, Margarita continued. I see no reason to buy more expensive and lower quality supplies. Well, you understand, we've been working with them for many years, the chief physician began to justify himself. And also, I personally know the director of this company. Is that why you were receiving kickbacks from them every month? Margarita asked softly, but firmly. Tomas's eyelid twitched. What do you mean? Do you have proof? Yes, we have documents, Margarita nodded toward the folder. There are your signatures and transfers to your personal account from this company. The chief physician realized there was no point in denying it. He decided to change tactics. Listen, these aren't that large sums. And besides, everyone needs to live. I make operational plans, attract VIP clients. Margarita sighed heavily. Do you understand that this is corruption? And the clinic suffers because, due to inflated prices, we can't afford some crucial improvements? Stop it. You'll get everything you need, he waved his hand dismissively. All right, fine. I can drop these suppliers, but then you won't get the good doctors I was planning to invite. What do you mean, I won't get them? Margarita was surprised. Well, I have connections, the chief physician smirked. A lot of doctors come to me, not to other clinics, because they trust my authority. If you're cutting off my sources of income, I won't be trying as hard, you know? He tried to speak quietly, as though confidentially, but Margarita was shocked by his audacity. So, he was directly blackmailing her, claiming that without his authority, she wouldn't be able to attract good specialists. I understand, she said coldly. And this conversation proves once again that you don't want any reforms. He narrowed his eyes, you won't manage without me. Stop fooling yourself. I'm the one who runs everything here. And you're just playing at being the owner. We'll see, Margarita replied just as coldly. But you'll be gone from the clinic if you don't stop. The chief physician shot her a venomous look and stormed out, slamming the door. Margarita sank into the chair, feeling it became hard to breathe. So that's it, she thought. He's threatening sabotage, but I can't let him continue the corruption. When Salvador found out about the conversation, he just hummed. I thought so. He won't give up without a fight. What should I do? Margarita asked. He might actually take some key doctors with him. Maybe, Salvador agreed. But, on the other hand, if he stays, the corruption will continue. The atmosphere of fear too. Is that how you want to manage the clinic? No, of course not, she replied. All right, I need to prepare for tough decisions. Indeed, in the following days, Tomas began to sway the doctors loyal to him, convincing them that under the new leadership, they would face constant losses, reduced incomes, and other nonsense. Some doctors believed him, but most were neutral. Their main concern was the stability of their jobs and salaries. Margarita, on the other hand, was planning to reasonably redistribute the funds to increase the salaries of regular staff, improve conditions, including bonuses for doctors, but without any kickbacks to the chief physician's pocket. As a result, when another conflict arose between Margarita and Tomas, this time due to an unjustly fired nurse who dared to oppose him, Margarita declared that she could no longer tolerate his arbitrariness and announced an order to suspend the powers of Chief Physician Pechiankin during an internal audit. You have no right, he shouted, almost grabbing her hand. I am the chief physician. I am the owner of the clinic, she said calmly. According to the charter, I have the right to remove the chief physician in case of serious violations. And you have plenty of those. Carlos, the lawyer, intervened at that point. He read an excerpt from the clinic's rules, confirming the legality of Margarita's actions. Tomas roared, grabbed his papers, and left, slamming the door. An hour later, he left the clinic, shouting to everyone. This is not the end. The news of the chief physician's departure spread quickly among the staff. Some sighed with relief, saying finally, while others feared what's next. Margarita didn't want to call what was happening a purge, but she realized that more difficult decisions might be ahead. The question immediately arose of who would be the chief physician while the search for a permanent candidate was underway. Margarita suggested that the heads of departments share the duties temporarily until a new person was found. She herself was ready to assist with administrative matters, still interacting with the staff. "But you can't always be both the owner and the chief physician," Salvador said. "It's physically exhausting. And it's not a fact that you have experience managing the entire medical process." "I understand," Margarita nodded. "That's why I'll focus on hiring a competent person who shares our values." "All right," Salvador agreed. "I'll help with the search for candidates." Meanwhile, a noticeable restructuring began in the clinic. The old suppliers, involved in corrupt schemes, were replaced by new ones, and more profitable contracts allowed for an increased budget. Margarita ordered that some of the saved funds be used to raise the salaries of nurses and orderlies, as well as to purchase high-quality consumables. People began to notice the difference after just a month. There were no more shortages of gloves, syringes, or systems. Margarita also reviewed the duty schedules, making them fairer so there would be no excessive overtime. And although some of Tomas' loyal doctors grumbled, saying that they could no longer take extra shifts, most of them appreciated the new order because overtime payment became more transparent and the workload was more evenly distributed. Of course, the changes weren't without difficulties. Margarita frequently encountered bureaucracy and resistance from those used to the old ways, but she was supported by the majority of staff who saw the positive effects of the changes. New candidates for the chief physician position began to appear, and people from other cities, hearing about the reform, showed interest. One day, an unexpected guest arrived. Carlos, the lawyer, brought in a man in his 40s with a pleasant appearance. Introducing him as Dr. Mariano, a well-known surgeon who had previously worked at a major city clinic, Mariano said he was interested in the position of chief physician if Margarita's policies were truly aimed at honesty and staff development. "I heard that you previously had an authoritarian regime," said the doctor, "but now, they say, everything is changing." "Exactly," confirmed Margarita. "Please, tell us about your principles." They talked for a long time. It turned out that Mariano was a thoughtful person, a supporter of evidence-based medicine, who respected nurses and junior staff. At the same time, he knew how to manage. Margarita felt that he could be a valuable candidate. After consulting with the board of directors in Salvador, Margarita officially invited Mariano to take the position of chief physician with a probation period. The staff received him with interest and cautious enthusiasm. However, some doctors close to Tomas began to spread rumors that an outsider had arrived and didn't know anything about local peculiarities. Margarita, aware of the discord, invited such skeptics to a meeting where they could discuss any issues together with Mariano. During the discussion, it became clear that many doctors were simply afraid of losing some privileges. But Mariano stated, "I am open to your ideas, but everything should be transparent and honest. If you had a habit of bypassing the rules, forget it." Some doctors scoffed, but then accepted the changes, seeing that things were really changing now. A few weeks into his tenure as chief physician, Mariano had already established contacts with the departments, organized quicker access to tests, and signed several beneficial contracts with suppliers of modern equipment. What pleased many was that he didn't forget about staff salaries and tried to ensure their comfort. Margarita felt happy. The clinic was truly starting to move in the right direction. Patients noticed that the attitude had become more humane. "You don't need to bribe anyone to get quality gloves here," joked one of the surgeons. "Everything arrives on time." However, the issue of Tomas remained. Since he was removed, he had disappeared. There were rumors that he was preparing a lawsuit against the clinic, accusing it of illegal dismissal. And indeed, a month later, a notification arrived in the office. The former chief physician demanded compensation, threatening to go to court. Margarita consulted with lawyer Carlos to determine how serious his claim was. "Formally, he can sue," Carlos replied, "but we have enough evidence of his violations, kickbacks, threats, illegal dismissals. If it goes to court, he has little chance. He's probably bluffing to get you to pay him off." "What should we do?" Margarita asked. "I would suggest officially responding that we are ready to defend our position in court," Carlos said. Most likely, he won't take the risk because he's afraid that all the details of his corrupt schemes will come to light. And that's what happened. Initially, Tomas made a lot of noise and hired a lawyer, but then he suddenly quieted down. Apparently, he realized that he didn't have the truth on his side. Soon, news came that he had moved to another city and tried to get a job at a local hospital. But there, his reputation had already been tarnished by rumors. "I guess it's not meant for him to continue here," Margarita said sadly. After all, he was a good specialist, but his thirst for power ruined him. "Well, it happens," sighed Salvador. "The important thing is that the clinic is now free from his dictatorial control." Thus ended the era of Tomas, who had once humiliated Margarita by saying, "Who gave such a nobody a white coat?" Everything turned out in such a way that he was forced to leave, while the clinic, under the leadership of the young heir and the new chief physician, entered a period of renewal. Margarita never forgot that, first and foremost, she was a nurse at heart. A person who had gone through all the stages of this work, which is why she continued to communicate with regular staff. Sometimes, she would still put on a nurse's coat and help in the wards. And although this caused smiles among colleagues, the clinic owner herself doing dressings, she believed that this was exactly what her grandfather had wanted. So that ownership wouldn't turn her into a detached boss. Of course, many tasks still lay ahead, attracting investments, strengthening the clinic's position in the market, and competing with other modern clinics. But Margarita already had allies, Salvador, Mariano, lawyer Carlos, and most of the staff who believed in the new policy of respect and fairness. One of the touching moments was the meeting when Margarita officially awarded the best workers of the month for the first time. Nurses, orderlies, lab technicians, those who were never noticed under the old regime, came up to the stage. Margarita handed them small bonuses and certificates, and people applauded, understanding that in this clinic, staff were no longer divided into elites and nobodies. "Thank you for noticing our work," said one of the award-winning orderlies with tears in her eyes. "We used to be just hands, washing floors." Margarita smiled. "You are part of a big mechanism, without which no patient can be saved. Thank you." And it was a sincere gratitude, and the whole room applauded. Looking back, Margarita remembered that day when she was first given the white coat in this clinic, and the chief doctor mockingly shouted, "Who gave such a nobody a white coat?" She thought about how far she had come. She had to endure humiliations, learn to dress wounds, run between departments, but now she had become what her grandfather had wanted, a full-fledged owner who knew the clinic inside and out. She understood that challenges would still come, but the most important thing had already happened. She had gained confidence in herself, the recognition of her colleagues, and the ability to follow the principles instilled by her grandfather, principles of humanity and professionalism. Months passed, and much changed in the clinic. Several new paid services were introduced, the approach to insured patients was revised, and the emergency department was strengthened. Margarita insisted that every employee attend communication workshops with patients, as well as training on modern care techniques. At first, some grumbled, "Now they make us learn more," but gradually, they understood, seeing that the quality of care was genuinely improving. Maria from the registration desk said, "Now, patients complain less because we know better how to greet them and where to direct them." Vicenta from surgery was glad that there were finally additional nurses, and she didn't have to work herself to the bone. Emilia from therapy shared that patients were thankful for the attentive treatment. And everyone felt that the atmosphere in the clinic had become calmer and friendlier. One day, Margarita was walking down the corridor when the elderly grandmother, whom she had once escorted to the examination room and been reprimanded for, ran up to her. The grandmother approached, joyfully exclaimed, "Daughter, I've been looking for you. I've already been discharged, and I wanted to thank you. They say you're in charge here now." "Not quite in charge," Margarita smiled, "just the owner, but we all work together here." "Oh, you're such a good girl," the grandmother said emotionally, shaking her hand. "You saved me then, and now, they say, you're bringing order to the whole clinic." "Well, thank you. I wish you health and happiness." Margarita felt warmth in her heart at those words. This was the reason for everything. for these simple moments when patients leave healthy and grateful. In the evening, after a tense meeting, Margarita stayed in her office, checking financial reports and planning the next reforms. Memories of her grandfather came to her mind. She took out a small photograph from the drawer. In it, her grandfather was holding her hand at the orphanage when he had just learned he had a granddaughter. Her father, Margarita's dad, had died, and her mother passed away during childbirth. It was only years later that her grandfather had found the only heir. In the photo, he was smiling at her, while she looked at him in fear, not understanding who this person was. "Grandpa," Margarita whispered, "I hope you see me and are proud that I'm trying not to betray your ideals." She put the photo aside and realized that she finally felt at peace. Yes, there were plenty of tasks ahead, but now she had confidence and strength. She was no longer the beaten orphan who had been mocked by the authoritarian chief doctor. She was a full-fledged owner, and most importantly, a true healthcare worker who cared about people's well-being. Somewhere in the corridor, employees passed by, discussing the new duty schedule. One of them noticed the light in Margarita's office and peeked in. "Oh, Margarita is still here. Everything all right?" "Yes, all good," she smiled. "I'll finish up and leave soon." "Take care," the employee called out and hurried on. Margarita shut down the computer, walked out, and looked around the spacious corridors. Now, not only diplomas and certificates hung on the walls, but also posters calling for respectful treatment of patients, mutual respect. She walked, feeling a slight fatigue and, at the same time, an incredible sense of relief. Someone from the night staff passed by, greeting her politely. Margarita nodded and headed to the elevator, thinking that tomorrow she would come early again, check on how things were going, and maybe stop by the treatment room to remind herself where it all began, with the white coat that was handed to her in the HR department and the scornful outburst of the chief doctor. At the elevator, she remembered that awful moment, who gave such a nobody a white coat, and smiled. "Now I'll give these coats to all the deserving people who come to our clinic to learn and work," she thought. Because she knew the true value of that coat from personal experience. It had become not just a symbol of the profession, but also a symbol of respect for the person. This chapter of her story was coming to an end, but another, even more significant one, was beginning. Now, she had to live up to her grandfather's trust, raise the clinic to a deserving level, preserve its soul, and help every employee feel needed and valued. And she had every chance of success because Margarita had people behind her who believed in her. And in her heart, there lived that same desire to help and support, which is the very essence of true medicine. With these thoughts, Margarita left the clinic in the rays of the setting sun, confident that all trials, be they mockery, insults, or intrigue, were surmountable when you had a goal, a genuine love for the chosen profession. Yes, the road from the bottom had not been easy. But it had taught her the most important lesson, to see the value in every person and never give up on the desire to make life better.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.